Okay, well, maybe I'll make a start. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to Parole de créateur face à l'urgence écologique, otherwise known as Creators Facing the Climate Emergency. So this is a series of conversation that brings together each time an artist and a scientist or thinker to discuss their work, as well as their ideas, thoughts, and solutions regarding today's environmental issues. For those who are new to the program, to the Fondation Thalie, we're a multidisciplinary art foundation based in Brussels, founded by the writer and collector Nathalie Gouillot. And the foundation aims at creating bridges between visual arts, creative writing, and societal issues through a program of exhibitions, monthly talks, and artist residencies. And at the moment, as you can see behind me, the foundation in Brussels is a beautiful exhibition by the artist Kiki Smith, who I'm sure many of you know, entitled Inner Bodies, up until the 1st of May. So I highly recommend you come see it if you're in or passing by Brussels very soon. In this conversation series, Creators Facing the Climate Emergency, we seek in particular to answer questions such as the following. What is the role and responsibility of the artists, scientists, and thinkers with regard to the environmental issues we're all facing? How are artistic practices being impacted, and how can artists collaborate with other disciplines to create a better future? How can we imagine also new ways of creating given our limited existing resources? We believe strongly that we need more than ever to hear the words of the creators around us, those that can help us conceive and construct new ways of being in the world today. And that's why this bilingual series with discussions once or twice a month in both French and English will welcome many important artists and thinkers as the year goes on, such as, of course, tonight's guests, but also many others coming up, such as the artists Rosella Biscotti, Thijs Berstika, that's next week, and Natsuko Uchino, and Noemi Sov. So plenty of more conversations to come. And the English-speaking conversations are all introduced and moderated by myself, Stefano Vendramin, as a curator specialized in environmentally engaged art. And just for information, the conversation is also broadcast live on our website, fondationthalie.org, on our Facebook page, and will be available in the next few days on YouTube as well. And so finally, I'd like to express, of course, my thanks to Daniel Wetzel and Albert Moukheiber for being with us today and for participating with us. Welcome. And just also to mention that please don't hesitate to think of any questions for our panelists today, for our two speakers today, because we will probably talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'd love to open up to any questions from the audience. So don't hesitate to be thinking of any questions as the conversation goes on. So to begin, I want to introduce our two speakers today. So first of all, Daniel, thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much. So Daniel Wetzel, you're a theatre maker. You co-founded the theatre label Rimini Protokoll in about the year 2000, over 20 years ago now, together with Helga Hug. Oh, can you pronounce it?
Yes.
And Stefan Kaigi, with whom you studied at the Institute for Applied Theatre Studies in Gießen, Germany. And since 2003, you're now based in Berlin and have created over the last 20 years, over 300 works on stages, streets, and various kind of urban sites, which you've also summarized now in a new book last year, Rimini Protokoll, which is published by Walter Koenig. And for me, Rimini Protokoll expands very much what we consider theatre, which is also why we invited you here today, because it's very much an artistic practice. Very much, it's normally we have more artists than theatre producers, but certainly you really challenge, I suppose, what we consider as theatre traditionally, with a lot of works that you make outside of theatre spaces, as much as within theatre spaces. And you often develop your works together with experts who have gained their knowledge and skills beyond the theatre, with pieces often involving a strong interactivity with the audience. These works, they often draw the attention of the public and therefore of society to important issues that no longer attract attention, often because we're so used to them. Issues that can be such as the function of democracy or climate change, which of course is one of the subjects of our conversation today. And you first made a big impact with the work Deutschland 2 in 2002, I think, which reproduced a session of the Bundestag, so the German parliament, with each participant in the taking the role of a delegate. And the president of the Bundestag at the time, Wolfgang Thiers, famously refused to allow the use of the former Bundeshaus in Bonn to stage the play, sparking a huge debate in Germany, from what I've heard, on the freedom of art, the relationship between art and politics, and the limits of theatre and reality. And more recently, to name just a few of your many pieces, your theatre piece, World Climate Change Conference, which we'll talk about today, first shown in Hamburg in 2015, divided its audience into the 195 nations negotiating at the annual UN conference. Your installation Win-Win, which was first commissioned in 2017 for the exhibition After the End of the World at CCCB Barcelona, and since shown in many museums internationally, puts the audience face to face with a swarm of jellyfish, and accordingly with the question of the survival of mankind and our impending climate crisis. And last year in 2021, the work Conference of the Absent, which hosts a conference on sustainability in which the lecturers are absent, and thus the lectures are given by spontaneous volunteers from the audience. So lots of very interesting work that we're looking forward to hearing about. Your work with Rimini Protokoll has received many awards: the German Theatre Award Faust, the Grand Prix Theatre from the Swiss Federal Office for Culture, the European Theatre Award, the Silver Lion at the Theatre Biennale in Venice, which I'm sure you're very proud. And your shows are now on display currently. We have, I've noted 3 that are currently on display. Solo for an Octopus at the Taipei Fine Arts Museum. In Lisbon, there's a Conference of the Absent at the Teatro do Barrio Alto. And at Vienna, there's also a new work called All Right, Good Night, as well as your online works, including also the app, The Walks, which we'll talk about, which enables anybody to download and participate in your work. I hope that was a good introduction.
That was quite an introduction. Thank you very much.
Over 20 years in 2 minutes. And Dr. Moukheiber, thank you also very much for joining us today. So to briefly introduce you, you're a neuroscientist, researcher, and clinical psychologist. You worked for 10 years at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, focusing on anxiety disorders and resilience. And you're now established independently, and you're a teacher at the Paris 8 University on the master's courses in clinical psychology and psychopathology. Is that right?
Yes.
And you also founded with fellow researchers the structure Chiasma, organization that focuses on critical reasoning and mental flexibility, in particular on how we form our opinions and how this impacts our decision-making. You're also a regular public speaker and intervene also in companies to share the latest scientific knowledge about our cognition and behaviors and how they impact us in our daily lives. And you're also the author of a book, Your Brain, or numerous books, I think, but the most recent one is Your Brain is Playing Tricks on You: How the Brain Shapes Opinions and Perceptions, which from what I've gathered is available in French and soon very much in English in May this year.
And in German.
Oh, fantastic.
If anyone is from Germany.
And so in this book, you discuss the functioning of the brain and the biases induced by some of the mechanisms, such as the Dunning-Kruger effect, the idea that the less we know about a subject, the less we are able to measure the extent to which we do not master the subject in question. And you also state that the knowledge of these mechanisms would make it possible to remake society based on a common base of reality, particularly regarding vaccines and global warming. So lots of interesting things to discuss. Daniel, I wanted to start with you to get a little bit more context for those who know your work a little bit less. So as I mentioned, you work obviously in the realm of theatre. You know, Rimini Protokoll, you call it a theatre label, but you make theatre that is very unusual in terms of what we often consider theatre when we go to the theatre. For instance, there is, from what I gather, there's no scripted story. There's very rarely traditional actors, so to speak. Often you incorporate what you refer to as experts of the everyday, saying that actors can't replace the experience of real life. So it's people with real experiences that are actually on stage, and the pieces are often based on interview and research related to the issues that you're talking about in each play. And so in some ways, it's not so much of a piece of creative writing as what you call an inventory of what is already existing in the world. And so some have referred to the work as documentary theatre, but your aim, from what I gather, is more to inform than to be political, which is often the aim of documentary theatre. And the plays are also really interesting because it's a strange mixture of fiction and reality. The events that you mention, that you talk about, are real events, but because they're events that have been experienced, but they're also fictitious in the way they've sort of been shaped in some way still for the stage, and there's a certain amount of autonomy in that. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you ended up making this kind of theatre? Maybe just telling us a little bit more about what your process is, maybe with an example.
Yeah, well, basically, I think about 30 years ago, we started with thoughts that are quite contemporary still, in the sense of that we have to do things really differently from now on. So we actually studied theatre, and me in particular as well, with a clear notion that actually the way theatre does work is not what attracts me into that. So, but the general, let's say the basics, they are very important, and they have become even more important throughout the last 30 years. Only the operational system of theatre sort of not just needs an update from time to time, but can really be under question mark. Like why is it always these stages, and why is it that you enter a place where people pretend to be other people? This is kind of really another century. And it has to do with playing, and there's nothing really wrong about it, but the stage and our willingness to, go somewhere and make other perceptions and make other experiences with where we live and what's happening and who are other people and what are they doing and what are other stories. This can be, more exciting if you quite try to find new games in the same place. In the center, though, it is that we meet and that we are interested. So that's what theatre basically is. So what are we interested in, and what are we who make theatre interested in? So that was the starting point for a lot of works that in the beginning not even really used the stage necessarily, because there people sit down and look up on a platform where there's a light. So the question of participation as an action also was there from the beginning. But you mentioned some pieces. So, and I think, Stefano, you saw Win-Win, which is a piece where the experts in that case are, you just hear voices from people that can tell us more about how the jellyfish function, how they work, since when they exist, and so forth. Interesting things about a species that hasn't changed much throughout millions of years. And in that piece, it's like the theater is like has a proper seating only for a very small amount of people, that they first look into their own mirror and discover themselves as kind of the crown of creation. And at some point, the mirror transforms into this tank where you then realize, okay, it really has living jellyfish rotating there. And in the meantime, you hear more about them, but you also hear more about humanity, mankind. And it's all about the question how we will evolve, whether we will exist in, let's say, 100 years from now, and what will be the difference between us who live today and those people that will live in 100 years of time. And the clear fact that jellyfish will not have changed a lot. Meanwhile, only their numbers will have increased a lot, because the way humans live on Earth is very, very, very good for jellyfish. And the fact that we empty the oceans from all other species also is a very, very good thing for jellyfish. So it's all about the species really being on a rise.
Yeah, it's the work that made me first encounter your work even though it's more fairly recent. I think it was 2016 in Barcelona, and then I saw it at the Royal Academy in London, and it just really stuck with me. So basically, it's in the exhibition, and you go into you have to wait for your time, and then you go into a small room where there's kind of a mini auditorium, like with about 5 or 6 people, and you sit down, and then the lights go down, and you have these headphones, and it explains to you the history of. Oh, is this a noise? And it explains to you the history of humanity, and asks you questions about yourselves in the room. And then you see these jellyfish, and it's an incredible, it's very visual, it's very engaging, but also it's an incredible analogy for me in terms of a way of thinking about the climate change issue, which is such a big and complicated and scientific and technical issue. But then we just see these jellyfish, and it's such a great metaphor, because the jellyfish, like you said, they've been around for millions of years. There's even jellyfish that have never died. The jellyfish, some jellyfish don't die, so they're still the same jellyfish. And they'll, so basically, as we're destroying the planet, they'll still be there. They were there before us, they'll be there afterwards. And like you said, they're the only ones, not the only ones, but they're one of the rare species that are thriving, because all their predators are dying, and they love warm water. So it's a really strong, powerful way of looking at the situation today.
So talking about them as theater, you're confronted with, let's say, actors or performers in front of you that give you really a different notion of the time of your lifespan as well. And us, this little group of humans, and then we discover on the other side of the tank, we discover another small group of humans, and then the piece is all about that we make science to each other, and so forth. So we're playing with our identity, and we are facing our, the fact that for us it's ending soon, be it for us as individuals, but perhaps also for humanity, but for them not. So it's sort of a notion of another time, of another form of eternity. And yes, there are these very, very miniature jellyfish that a Japanese professor, whose name I don't recall at the moment, he apparently sings a song to them with who he works as a scientist, because he admires their ability to despecify their cells back to stem cells and respecify them. That means they can reproduce their physical body again and again. And unless something smashes their body or eats them, they can apparently live pretty long. Eternity, nobody can claim, because who would measure that?
And what was your process behind making this work? And perhaps as well, maybe you can talk about one of your other works as well.
So
how did you go about researching? And
yeah, I think that the most important thing is that for us, theater has to do with, in particular, and has to do with research in another way than Albert would maybe describe it. But for us, it's important that every project tries something and tries to find something, that it includes also new things for us. So I didn't know much about jellyfish, but when we did a project about the brain, basically a theater project that dealt with the brain, there was this woman who had a dream of her brain. She had suffered a brain injury, and she told me about a dream in which her brain had converted into a jellyfish. And there's a bit of a similarity in the shape, Anyways, from that point on, there was also the idea to, wow, could we have a jellyfish on stage? And then the answer was, no, you can't. It's very, very complicated. So later on, it turned out that there's another occasion to get into this. So how is it possible to make an experience like that? So that's a theater research question. And who can tell us more about this? And then we are researching for our pieces, but we want to put you as the spectators basically in the similar situation, only that we have sort of built the frame for an experiment, an experience that you can make that is an experiment, but we know how it ends for you. So we have built the frame. And that can take very different forms. So this piece that we're showing today in Lisbon is called the Conference of the Absent. That doesn't have to do anything with animals at the first place. It more has, again, with a question to do with the question, what do we want to show and what do we want to talk about today, and what is the reality, that part of the reality that we want to look into. And it is actually a piece that we invented before COVID, but following the question, what if we couldn't meet anymore because of climate change? For us theater people, theaters are really horrible institutions when it comes to sustainability. It's horrible, you know, because it's cheaper to buy things again than to recycle them. So if you're interested, you just, you know, Google a bit, or you ask people from the theater that you know how they deal with their stage designs, what happens with them afterwards. It is just like with fairs. Buy, use, you know, place it, and when you don't need it anymore, throw it. It's too expensive to recycle in most of the cases, or to store. Storage is very, very, very expensive. So we thought, okay, let's suppose that climate change will force us to just to travel as little as possible. But how can we perform for you in another city? So the idea was to develop like a stage design and also a technique that gives people the possibility to perform without traveling. That means in that case, it's the audience who takes the role of those people with whom we have worked on their lives and expertise and of what they have to share. For example, on the right-hand side, you see, in that case, two women, but this is random because these are two actually people from the audience who decided to perform the part of a woman who that time stayed on the island of Samos as a refugee waiting for her acceptance. And it took more than a year until she was accepted. And she said, I can't be with you tonight and talk to you because you don't let me travel. You want me to wait on this island like a slave until I have my approval. Anyways, she talks also about the fact that there will be changes, that things are going to change also for her. And then there's a choreography that relates to change. That's what these two people dance, following audio instructions. On the left-hand side is another person from the US that talks about minimizing the amount of people on Earth. So it's experts on different reasons of absence that the audience performs every evening other people. Some of the texts are found in envelopes, but the whole thing is moderated by a voice that is played back through audio. And so none of us basically has to travel so that this piece happens. And the research is how does this thing play anyway? This is a photo from another piece which is called Utopolis, and this is in Cyrillic letters. It says Utopolis, and it asks the question, and that has to do with theater both as well as with how we deal with the climate change and the change of the world anyways, to what extent we can think utopic ourselves, and what are utopias, and to what extent things that might have felt like utopias some years, centuries ago, have already become a reality. So if you would have told Thomas Morris, who wrote Utopolis in the 16th century, that there will be a train station like this in St. Petersburg, or that there will be hospitals for everyone almost, that there will be schools, that everybody has a duty to go to school, that there will be libraries for everyone, that there will be something like the possibility to get divorced even 3 times without getting slaughtered. All these things might have even extended his range of imagining utopias. So with the audience in that piece, it's all about the audience writing utopic messages on the way of this piece that we stage in different cities, where you walk with loudspeakers to the city and again listen to different stories, but also questions that then convert into messages that people are sharing. Maybe you can show the very last picture of this.
And just like,
yeah.
So just to go back maybe to the conference of the absent as well, but and so how do you see the people change as they basically asking people from the public to play a role of somebody else, to read a text by somebody else? How do you feel that they are transformed by this experience?
Well, in that case, it's really.
Is there anything you want them to feel as well?
Well, it's very different situations that you can slip into that. You normally are listening to somebody who talks to you on stage, for example. And in our case, it will not be an actress, but rather a person that talks about herself or himself. But in that case, that person is absent and you are going on stage, opening the envelope and reading the instructions by this person and what this person wants you to say, or you hear it on headphones. And in both cases, you start to incorporate somebody that you don't know. So what you see on stage with these people who do it, you observe people, how they, within 10-15 minutes per scene, realize who they are. It's kind of the drama of becoming a human by just understanding what I'm saying about myself. So you might hear the story of, let's say, a person who has survived the Holocaust and now speaks to the audience, and you are now giving this person a voice. That person lives in Israel, still 98 years old, but is alive and wants you to speak on his behalf and how he survived. And so as you speak, you gradually understand who you represent. So, and representation, of course, is everything in theater, but we are trying to find other possibilities to use representation to make other experiences with our reality. What people are supposed to feel, I don't want to manage and not to want to manipulate. What I want to do is I want to share what we found with you in a way so that you can perhaps enter this field of experience that we have entered before. And that's the research part of it.
I wanted to ask you as well, how do you feel the difference would be? I mean, there's clearly a clear difference in terms of you going to a theatre, watching a performance, as we tend to do, or interacting in something like the Conference of the Absent and reading out a text by somebody who's been through the Holocaust or who's an expert in a subject, or also, you're relating to the subject matter with, say it's climate change in a much more active way. How does that change how does that change how we feel about, in terms of the neuroscientific scientific element behind it? What is the difference in our interaction?
I really can't say. I think that in drama and so on, we are used from dealing with drama in literature courses mainly and in school. And there's always that we should, by the end of the lesson, also make the teacher happy by saying what we understood, what the drama wants us to understand, or what's the conflict that we experience about. But basically, it's very often really the same stuff throughout centuries that drama deals with. So apparently theater is also programming us in a much slower pace than dramas discuss things, and apparently humanity is really, really slow in reprogramming our behavior. But however, language is a very important thing. And I don't know what happens in too much in English or in French, but in German, throughout the last year, there has been such a tremendous reprogramming of our understanding of gender, so clearly different. We speak different than 2 years ago. It just really was quite a change that didn't come from theater, but it affects some theater. It changes the form, it changes how we pronounce the words. So to just respect the fact that the last centuries have been just insane when it comes to the treating people equal no matter what gender. So in German, it's possible to really give clearly make a clear sign. So, and I think a game like the Conference of the Absent, or to sit in front of jellyfish, is also a way of kind of reprogramming, in the sense of making an intense experience that we can provide, but I cannot tell you what happens with that experience.
Maybe Albert, you can tell us a little bit what you think about it.
Hi again, thanks for having me, and thanks Daniel. The works you've presented are really fascinating. I knew a bit because I searched a bit before, but hearing it from you is another dimension. There are many things that are happening in all these experiences. I don't know what you like to call them, artworks, experiences, plays. I don't know what's the technical word to describe them. And as Daniel was saying, our language is very important to how we perceive the world. But maybe it's going to be weird to say that from a neuroscientist. We tend to think that we are our brain, but in cognitive science, we don't. Like, there's a whole current that I kind of adhere to that doesn't think that we are our brain. Our brain is like the center of integration of information, but we have something called an embodied mind. Like, my thoughts are not just happening in my brain. My thoughts are also happening in my body, and my thoughts are also happening in what I do with my body, and it's embodied also in a context. So, for example, the thoughts that I'm having now are also happening in your brains because your presence is changing the ideas that I'm having. So this theory of enactment is called enactment. Takes into account, it's also called inactivism. It takes into account what we do with our body. So if you're watching a play, even if you're hearing the same words versus you're reading them or you're acting them with your body, you go up on stage, the whole thought process is different when you're enacting the world versus you're listening to it. Especially in the case that I think I don't want to botch the names, the what should I call them? Plays? What should I call them?
Pieces, maybe, just pieces.
The pieces, okay, the pieces of absence. What is it called?
The Conference of Absence, you mean?
The Conference of Absence.
Yeah.
It's something like, I did my PhD on social anxiety, so I work a lot on social cognition. How do we perceive others? And in social cognition, we have three order of thoughts. We have what we call first order thoughts, what I think about myself. Second order thoughts, what I think about you. And third order thoughts is what I think that you think about me. Am I thinking that you're thinking that what I'm saying is interesting, etc. And we usually don't have access to the thought of other people. But unless you're a telepath, we don't have access. And I think what's interesting in this Conference of Absence is that you create a sort of dissonance where I am on stage. So usually when you're on stage, you talk about yourself if you're in a conference, but then you are using the social cognition of someone else that is not here. So you're in this inactivism. And I think the word activism is really interesting in this case. This inactivism, you're actually two people at the same time. You're the person that you are, but you're also enacting somebody else. And of course, this changes representativity a lot because, again, if you are in this framework of inactivism, you're not your brain. You're a brain in your body in a context. And these three interactions are constantly changing the way your brain is integrating information. So doing things, seeing the jellyfish, but more like the absence piece, I think creates a whole different dynamic than I would say, like, even if the actual person is there and talking, it wouldn't be the same.
And there's of course, I think the experience, perhaps Daniel wants to say something as well. My thoughts is that there's experience as well in the moments when you're there, but also I imagine that there's a significant experience that you keep with you as well. There's a sort of a longer term as well difference.
That would be a bit different and a bit harder to hypothesize for this very simple reason of what we talked. We are creatures of habits. And how much time am I spending being someone else, being this absent person? Because we have default choices, and fortunately or unfortunately, it depends on what you're trying to change. We don't change really fast. Like Daniel was talking about jellyfish that haven't changed before we came and probably after we leave. We haven't changed that much either. We change our cities, we change our lives, but for example, our brain has probably been the same for the past 50,000 years. we like to tell ourselves that the era we're living in is particularly special, and every era wants to feel special. I like to say you're unique like everybody else. But we have this constance that sometimes is very good because it allows cooperation. If every day I'm someone else, you'd have a hard time figuring out how I'm going to react, and you have a hard time collaborating. But sometimes it's also bad because sometimes your default choices are bad and you know them, and you have a very hard time changing them. We'll talk, I think, later about this whole, what we call the intention action gap. When I have the intention to do something and when I can actually put it into action, there's a gap that can be more or less small, but there's a whole theory on what we call marginal gains. And I think if you change a bit every day, if you're exposed to such pieces, if you have a different habit, etc., this is basically what we try to do in therapy. Therapy is basically trying to change something that is actually a really big problem for the person, versus us trying to change other things in our lives.
Is it something that you aim to do, Daniel, to change how we think about things once we've experienced your work? Is that something that's quite intentional?
No, it's not my intention, our intention, to change anyone, because this is just the wrong attitude, I think. But we are changing perhaps on another level when it comes to perception, and when it comes to language, and it wants to kind of, make other experiences. That means enhancing our memories of things that we just, how we spend time, basically. So we want to provide experiences and learn things, and that we want to share, so there will be, you will make an experience, but I don't want to say, I want you to change for any reason. That's just the wrong attitude, I think. And the other wrong attitude would be to just do it for myself, and it would be very enigmatic, and you wouldn't know what's going on. It's just art in a sense that kind of closes and creates just an enigma in front of you. It's also a nice experience, but this is also not what I'm interested in doing. So it is always a process of communication, basically, of transferring, and of also in a different way than in journalism or science, to play with the elements. Because we don't have to take all those responsibilities that scientists should, and journalists, when they describe things.
And Albert talked about habits that we have very strong habits, and in some of your works, I feel like in Remote X or even in the walks, I feel like part of the work is making us realize these ingrained habits that we have, for instance, in a city, that we do everything so automatically, that we go down the same street and we're not even conscious anymore of a lot of the decisions and the journeys we make in a city. Would you say that's right? That's part of your work as well, in terms of making us question or interrogate these habits that we have?
Yeah, I mean, when you speak with somebody who knows about any particular aspect, be it jellyfish or in one of these audio walks that you mentioned, it's all about water. And for that, we went to various places that they have to do with water, for example, water recycling and so forth. And I was standing in a hall in Barcelona somewhere where all that water passes by, that just comes from the toilets and stuff. And then a few hours later in another place where it's then being filtered. And it just changes your awareness of things in a way that doesn't change you. It just changes a little bit your awareness of things. And walking through the city with things that you hear about different states and shapes of and aspects of water, creates maybe another awareness also. I don't know if you ever thought of trying to visualize how the water rises in every building. You stand by in every building, there are these tubes filled with water stand by, and when you open a tap, it just jumps in, and there's always a pressure in every building that pushes the water up all the time so that you can open it. It's not coming from down there when you want it. It's already there. Pressure, pressure, pressure everywhere. And that's the same like trees, and it's basically also has a lot to do with the same technique. And that's why quite interesting to look at buildings like that suddenly, to imagine all this 3-bar based pressure that is everywhere.
Also on the theme of habits, I mean, I suppose one of the interesting things for me in terms of habits is coming back to the idea of our, our climate emergency, is that we very ingrained in habits. We know that we need to change our habits. We're used to doing things in a certain way, of course, as well. We're coerced about our surroundings into doing things in a certain way. Maybe Albert, you can talk a little bit about, why do we have these habits that are so ingrained, and would you say that these habits are also limiting us from enabling us to change in the way that we want to, we should, or at least we want to a lot of the time?
There are many folds to this question. The first thing is, we're creatures of habit. The simplest reason is for efficiency. Automation leads to efficiency. If every time I want to hold the cup, I have to learn it again, it's quite costly and it wouldn't work. If once I learn something, it becomes a habit. We call these heuristics. Like our brain works through approximations, and approximation that work quite well. Walking, like when I walk, my brain is not calculating the strength with which I have to lift a leg, how many centimeters I have to move it forward, the strength with which I was to put it on the floor and then do it again. Otherwise, we'd look like a robot, which is why robots walk this way, because they'd have to do these calculations and they weren't quite efficient. Our brain works in an approximation way. It's a bit like more messy, and it works, but sometimes I might stumble and fall, but it's an acceptable cost. Same thing for the rest of our functioning. We work in habits, and is it good or bad? It depends what we're trying to change. Again, if every time someone, let's say I'm a calm person and something happens and I don't like it, if I get suddenly angry, it sends we are social animals. It sends a signal like, why is Albert not acting the way he's used to it? The stability in our functioning is very important for us to be able to collaborate. But everything has a silver lining, unfortunately, and sometimes when we do need to change and can't, it becomes a handicap. So again, it's not good or bad, it's contextual. In certain contexts, having these habits and not being able to change quickly is extremely important for efficiency, for collaboration, for stability, etc. And in other situations, not being able to change can be a huge hindrance, because sometimes we need to adapt. And if the system we've created is not flexible enough, like the one we've created, it becomes complicated, like the one we've created, not in the modern world, again, like through civilizations. And this is why a lot of civilizations collapsed, because they couldn't adapt because of the rigor of the way we had built our lives.
I guess I agree, there's certainly not good or bad, but I suppose we are now conscious of the fact that we do need to change our behavior.
Oh, in the case of global warming, not being able to change is absolutely bad. That's for sure. I was talking like in general, but if we take the specific, not only in climate change, like let's say I'm in a relationship, I've been in a relationship for a while and this relationship is bad for me, I can't leave it. That's also a bad thing that I can't change. But yes, when we're talking about potentially species extincting events, I would classify it in the bad column, not the good column.
And so what, concretely, like what are the main effects, like kind of behavioral effects that's stopping us from being able to change? For instance, I want to buy better food, I want to go traveling less, by plane, there's all these things that we know we should be doing, and actually we just end up not doing them.
So there are many effects. We can divide them into two. We can go through them a bit fast. We have what we call individual effects and systemic effects, because again, our cognition is always embodied in a context. So firstly, the individual effects, we've already talked about one, which is habits. We're used to like taking the plane, singing under the shower, eating meat, etc., using our cars, etc. So habits. The second one is something a bit more complex. It's called learned helplessness. It's the fact that if you try now to put a lot of effort into fighting climate change, chances are you won't succeed. So it sends you like a negative feedback loop. and then you become helpless and you learn to be helpless, and then you're like, I can't do anything about it, so I'm going to stop, because anyways I've been killing myself to use less plastic, etc., etc. And then you look out of the window and you see that the others are not doing much. Another effect is illusion of knowledge. So illusion of knowledge, Daniel talked about it, about the pipes. We call this, like, the specific thing you were mentioning is called illusion of explanatory depth, is that we tend to not understand how the things around us work, whether it's pipes or our fridge or microwave, etc. And the illusion of knowledge is that we overestimate what we think is important for climate change, what is not important for climate change. And sometimes, for example, there are a lot of studies that have shown that someone from a poor country that has no idea about climate change pollutes much less than someone from a rich country that takes all the important steps of not using plastic, not using a lot of water, turning off their lights, etc. Because at the end of the day, they might go on a vacation to LA, and then this flight offsets all the other things. So not being able to measure what to do. Another one is called diffusion of responsibility. Like, it's a global problem, so everyone can say, like, it's also called, it's a form of spectator effect. Why should I do it? Why not others? We see this a lot in governments. Like, the government would say, if I start going green, I'm going to lose in this huge race, this huge rat race that we're all in, based on our economical models. Like, we have to have a good GDP, we have to make more money, etc., etc. And if I start and the other countries are not doing the same, I will lose the race. So why not they start first? Why me, not them? And it starts to diffuse the responsibility. And another form of diffusion of responsibility is saying, like, it's not my action that are going to make a difference. I'm not going to blame myself, let the other people do it, etc., etc. And then you have systemic causes. There are many. The first one is something we call skin in the game, that the people that are taking the decisions are not impacted by the decision they're making. So we have created a system where, like, the politicians that are enacting the laws are not that impacted by the consequences of what they're doing. So it doesn't push them to create these things. The other one is social norms. We go outside, like, let's say that you want a society that eats less meat, but all the restaurants around my house are not, like, have meat. So it's going to be harder because it's the social norm around me. Third one is asymmetrical information. The people that have the information took a long time to distribute it to the rest of the system. We've known about global warming in the people that do research on the topic since the 40s. And it's like in the past 10 years that it has got to the forefront. There are others, like, it's a complex idea. I'm not going to go through all the cognitive processes that are involved, but the important thing is to understand that there are things that are individual and things that are systemic, and we can't think about one without the other.
And you think by knowing these that we can also try and fight against them in some way? And I wondered also, Daniel, are you conscious of these sort of behavioral elements, these neuroscientific elements, when you're making your work? Is that something that you've thought about, that you've used in your creation process?
No, rather in life, and when dealing with a depression or something like that. But when it's about doing your work, no, yeah, but not in the scientific way, analytic way that describes it, but more in an intuitive way. It's just funny. I had to switch off for a moment because I got an urgent call from my colleague in Lisbon, and she just called me because because we have that show tonight and tomorrow, and she said, like, do you have this word in that one text? It's Vorstellung. Did you mean imagination or presentation? So in German, it's the same. It's like the show and the idea is the same word. So that kind of describes the fringe between my so-called inner, and I think it's thanks to French philosophy that we don't assume that there's so much inside myself, but like, let's say that the body that the perception context that Albert describes makes me deal with reality in an individual way, and on the other hand, so often so intuitive. And the situation in theater, when you enter a stage, you realize that nothing that you're used to do, you can do it, you know. And with actors, you can, when you say, take a chance, sit down on the stage, the first thing that they will ask is, why? Well, why should I? What is my reason to do that? Because suddenly it's all under a new mode of perception and of concept and so forth. So I don't know if that's in English, the V effect, like Verfremdung, alienation effect, that you have in front regarding yourself, regarding our society. That's, I think, something that theater can provide us with, or the dealing with us. And I think that's what interests us. It's a word that comes from Brecht and from theater, where it's not just the perfect illusion, but where it's really like a permanent realizing of, hey, what's going on? I mean, what are we actually doing? And what is the habit about? And why is that habit? And can we just, you know, reprogram it in a way? It's awareness in that sense, but it's an awareness that enjoys to discover. And I think because theater is also always, we're talking about it now something very serious, but I wouldn't go if it wasn't fun, right? So it is, and I think to deal with perception and so on, unless you work on anxieties like you did, Albert, when you research, it's also the fun to discover how it works and how we work and how we function. Fun in the sense of erkenntnis, in the sense of, making a deep experience. Whenever humor enters the place, I learn better.
I wondered if there's any questions from the audience. Feel free to write any questions if you have any. Albert, do you have anything? We can certainly see that with theatre. Do you feel like as well with art more generally that there's a certain element within art that enables us, you know, perhaps in losing our perception, you know, what is real, what is not real, or in many of the kind of elements within art, do you feel like there's something that do you think that art it can be an important way of changing our habits, perceptions, and particularly with regard to the climate emergency? Is it something that you feel like the artists have a particular power, you know, through these mechanisms?
Absolutely. I don't think they have a power. I think it's crucial. I think we cannot do it without art. Like, I don't know when we had this, like, we are a species of storytellers. And I don't know when we got to a point in time where we oppose like art and science, for example. When I was a student, the faculty was called the Faculty of Arts and Science. And for me, science and art are almost the same thing. When I'm designing an experiment, I'm trying to have fun. But for me, like the most absolute similarities between scientists and artists is the sense of redundancy that underpins both our works. And like, let's take a very simple example. Like, scientists can spend their time trying to work out like what gravity is or what depression is. In my case, what depression is. But all of us understand intuitively what is depression or what is anxiety. I feel anxious, my heartbeat accelerates. In the same way, like artists, like, do we really need a poem, a poet, or a play to explain to us why sunset is beautiful or how a heartbreak is very hard? I don't think so. But I think that this is where poetry and art and science are the same. They're trying to make sense of something in which we live, to describe nature and the phenomenological experience of life in terms so absolute that they cannot be denied anymore, even though everyone understands them. Like, when someone asks me, what do you do? I say, I'm an explicitator. I try to explicit things that you know already in different words. Like when Daniel says, when you asked him if he knows the concept I'm talking about, this is maybe not the concept, but of course I know what he's talking about, because we're talking about humans. And to me, this is why science and art is the same thing. And the irony of it all is that it's not the scientist and the poet that are important, but not nature itself. And I think this is extremely important when fighting climate change, because when Daniel does his installation on jellyfish, I think the winner of the installation is not Daniel nor the participants, it's the jellyfish. And when I'm talking about the brain or neuroscience, I think the winner is not the researcher or my patient, but the fascinating mechanisms of the brain. And I think this fascination, this curiosity, this imagination is necessary. And I think art is an excellent way of sublimating this and making it absolute. And even if our societies function by law, etc., you need individuals to take consciousness, to get conscious about the things. And when they do, then we can have these habit changes. So I think artists are one of the most important blocks. Maybe, I don't know, it's not a competition, but I think with a lot of scientific thoughts come from art, and a lot of art come from science. And I think they're much more complementary than this new story of opposition that I don't even know who came up with it, probably technocrats. But other than this, I think that we do almost the same job, which is we're fascinated by nature.
Daniel, do you have anything to say in reply?
Yeah, no, I actually agree. I was thinking of that sometimes the questions are asked in a different way, but yeah, it feels the same, only from a different angle. Yeah.
You've collaborated a lot as well. You're in your own work with many different disciplines.
Sure. I mean, it's so great to just meet people and ask stupid questions. It's my favorite thing to do, you know. And it's always enlightening what happens, and you can always make by asking. You're also creating something in the person that you have asked, you know. And yeah. I mean, we all seem to talk more and more and more, which is not, I like all this podcast thing that happened throughout the last 10 years. This is new, because before media were so much, you know, concentrated, who speaks and so on. And I like this explosion of conversations in a way that happens globally. Not globally, though, in that, but yeah, in particular zones of the world. But yeah, I think asking is a very good mode of living.
Okay. I guess unless we have any questions from the audience, I'm going to ask one final time, but maybe we can end with the question we asked to all our speakers on the program, which is, you know, for our audience, you know, they've watched the talk, and if there's one thing that you could tell them to do tomorrow to you know, in the fight against climate change, and on a personal level, what can they do? And also, do you have any particular reading as well that you recommend for our audience? That's a question for both of you. Maybe Daniel?
I've read the book. I'm just trying to figure the name, but you will find it. It's called Utopias for Realists. It's a small book by a Dutch historian, I think, young Dutch historian, who talks about, utopias for realists. It discusses some things that are always declared to be utopic, and in fact they're not. There's not to spoil it too much, but there's a very interesting story about how come that Richard Nixon was almost to sign a law that would provide a lot of people with basic income. Richard Nixon, and it was just stopped last minute. The law was actually written and ready for signature. It's quite an interesting book. That's the first that came to mind now. I can't tell people what to do, really not, because I explained it's like, and I don't think it works that way. But if I want to share something private, you know, like don't do it, but I do it. It's one of these small things. I have the habit when there's a yogurt to take away that, you know, lid and put these two things, like the plastic cup and the lid, in two different places, so to, you know, save the aluminium. That's one of those things. And when I then think of how waste management happens in Germany, I know I just do it for myself and not for the planet. But if I do it, you know, just this little, you know, these things are really sorting all that stuff, knowing it's really for close to nothing, because it's on the other end of the regulation, how you deal with separated waste is such a catastrophe. And we can do a lot, but at the other end, it's not really happening. I don't trust that, but still, to think that if we all do it, you guys have to make it better, tells me again it starts from me as a user and as an individual, instead of waiting for the government to come top down with any regulations. Why should they think of anything? But I guess Albert has exactly the opposite take. Is it so?
And I want to just, before we go to Albert, I think the book is by Rutger Bregman.
Right. Yeah, Bregman. Yeah, Rutger Bregman. Mm-hmm.
And it rings true. I mean, I know there's somebody in the comments said Donna Haraway's works are also seminal for new thoughts on population control and interventions with nature.
Absolutely.
And it reminds me of a project by a French entrepreneur called Cédric Carl, who has a project where he's found lots of inventions from history, some of them very, very old inventions. And now it's bringing them back to show that actually a lot of them would be very useful today. And they're inventions, some of them from hundreds of years ago. And he's sort of being like, well, actually, we don't even need to find new inventions. They already exist. We just need to remember them and use them again.
What's his name?
Cédric Carl. Carles. And Albert, to finish off, would you have a reading, apart from your own book, of course, which you're all going to read?
Thanks. Yeah, I have two books that come to mind. The one about climate, it's a comic book actually, but it's in French. And it's called Le Monde Sans Fin by Christophe Blain and Jean-Marc. The World Without an End by Jean-Marc Jancovici. And the book in English, since we were talking about fascination by nature, and we're talking about jellyfish. I was reading recently a book on fungi and mushrooms, and I think it's one of the most fascinating books I've read, and I didn't know much about mycology and fungi, and it's called Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. I also love the name of the author. He's called like Merlin, like the Merlin and Sheldrake, and for writing a book on mushrooms, I think like it has some form of poetry just by the title. It's called Entangled Life: How Fungi Make Our World and Change Our Mind and Shape Our Future. And it's the role of mushrooms in shaping everything we do without even noticing it. And it's a book that really like marked me. And about the thing we can do, yeah, I think it's a bit of the opposite. I think like we have a bottom up and top down approaches. I think maybe it's because also I'm a psychologist. I'm seeing more and more people that have something called solastalgia, eco-anxiety, like people that are stressed by climate change and feel that the responsibility is only on them. And as I was saying, we have like individual responsibility, but we also have a systemic responsibility. And I think what we can do, what the person can do starting today is start to make the system responsible, like push for local laws, create common gardens together, work in your neighborhood to systemize things. Because what Daniel was saying happened actually to me. I used to like separate my garbage extremely methodically, and then one day I was on the street and the garbage bin came and they put everything in the same garbage bin.
Yes.
And I felt like I was torn from the inside. And I still do it because I agree with Daniel that sometimes we do stuff for us because it makes things stay on the forefront of our consciousness, and it's very important. But I think that starting tomorrow we should also create systemic changes. Most of the changes that we've had in society were fed from the bottom up, but were systemized top down because we live in representative democracy. And we're talking about representativeness, and the absence are us, and the representative are the people representing us. And maybe they should read our text and not just decide their own text. And maybe they should learn a bit from the works of Daniel.
Thank you. I totally agree. And Esperance from the audience also mentions Annette Singh's book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, which is another...
I'm going to check this one because I just finished my mushroom book and I'm really
another classic on the same subject. Now. And we also have a talk, we have, I think in April, which is around mycelium as well, with an artist who works around mycelium, Natsuko Uchino.
Try to get Merlin Sheldrake to participate.
It will be with Marc-André Sellost, who's a French expert on the soil and mycelium. And so just to finish off, well, I just want to say thank you very much to you both. It's been really fascinating to have you here.
Thank you.
Hear what you have to say. Thank you for all of our audience, obviously, for participating and contributing. Daniel, as you said, or as we said, you have at least 3 shows at the moment, one in Taipei, one in Lisbon, one in Vienna.
And in London.
Anything else you want to mention as well?
There's also in London, there's Uncanny Valley. You can find quite a nice article in The Guardian of yesterday, I think, online. It's a robot, not a robot. It's like an imitation of a living German writer. And my fellow colleague Stefan has made a copy of his appearance with, I think, 700 motors, so to simulate his face in a perfect way.
Okay, thank you. And Albert, your book, Your Brain is Playing Tricks on You, is available in English and German very soon. Is there anything else you want to mention as well coming up for you?
No, I'll just go on doing my research. I worked on the Uncanny Valley because I use virtual reality, so I'm interested in reading about this. No, if people are interested, I give conferences in Paris at the MK2 Cinema once per month on the relationship between cognitive sciences and society. And we're doing next is A Crowd Really Wise, and we'll talk about group decision making.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So just to finish off, so we obviously have the exhibition in Brussels as well. I very much invite you to come to Brussels and see our lovely exhibition behind me, Kiki Smith in Embodied until May. And the next conversation will be next Thursday, the 3rd of March, with Thijs Bersticker, an amazing artist, and Miriam Boumran, who's the environmental economist and senior researcher on biodiversity and ecology at UNESCO. And this conversation is replayed on Facebook, will be available on YouTube very soon on audio podcasts as well. And please read our newsletter, Instagram, Facebook to be up to date. And that's all I have to say. So I wish you all a very, very fantastic evening and a great start to the weekend.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Salut Albert.
Salut, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.